add, and that's what's in the board folder.
So we're pretty much asking for the compliance with the ELAP. That is our...
Right, no, I understand all that, but the thing I'm concerned about in the proposed language, I would change the hour to the boards, but, and that goes back to what Steve was saying. In the first paragraph, on the third line and on the sixth line toward the end. But normally in an RFP we have a statement of what is to be submitted in response, to the solicitation. If they want to, if they want to submit, they need to submit X number of copies of this and Y number of copies of that, and there's nothing like that in this ad because you don't necessarily have that. But,
we can't mandate a number of hours. We're asking them to come certify our lab.
Right.
It's up to them how they're going to achieve that.
No, I understand that, but they should, in their proposal, they should say this is our projected approach. So that we know, what their proposal is, how much it's going to cost. Criteria. What are the criteria? And this, we have this sample letter. It's still got Kathy Young's name in there on the deer line. So I mean, it's like, that may be how it winds up, but we can't put it out that way. You should use, my recommendation would be use blanks instead of the dollar signs and X's, because you don't want to necessarily by the dollar signs indicate a price range. Where they take, like, there's $6 signs on one thing, and that's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's not what we're looking for. I mean, this is something I think we should refine and maybe have a special meeting on so we can get it advertised ASAP.
And next, I need permission to advertise our lab service agreement. It is expiring end of June. I've been working with our new lab manager. He'd like to instill a penalty in the event where they don't achieve a 10-day turnaround. We haven't done that before, so I've kind of been working with Al to see what would we have to have in place. I don't know that that's a road we want to go down, but the lab director proposed it, where he would have a log book to log when the sample changed hands, log it back in. We'd have to then track that to the invoice, and he's proposing short paying 10% if they don't achieve the 10-day turnaround or whatever the samples require. We haven't done that before. I don't see a fundamental problem with doing that, except
they raise the price.
Yeah, we're maintaining for someone at the clerical level to see an invoice came through, do I pay the full amount or deduct some percentage? Yeah. And where does that fine go? Is that income that goes back to ratepayers? I think that's one of the reasons we haven't.
It offsets the cost, so it's just we pay less, right?
Yeah.
But there would be a concern that if there's a legitimate reason why they can't, complete the test within a certain period of time, like sometimes that happens.
Yeah.
Or just in terms of that. We should have our lab guy in this meeting so he can talk to us about it. But there's some conditions where they need to extend the period, in terms of the refrigeration and the time that has to elapse.
The turnaround time is important because there's times we get in a situation where I'm waiting for last set of numbers and getting ready to report on the DMR. So, I think when Kelly's frustration and me bugging him for numbers, I think he came up with that and thought it was worth bringing up here.
Well, it's a good idea, but we ought to just make sure that we understand that if there are legitimate reasons why it could have to be extended in certain circumstances, we need to know what those are. Maybe there aren't any, but somebody's got to tell us that.
Have you had that in the past?
Yes.
Problems with it? Quite a bit?
Yeah.
There was a fire at
Wagon
Microvac
turnaround.
Labs, and Pace has taken on a lot of what had been going to Microvac.
Right.
So now they want to increase our rates because it's costing them extra processing or expedited shipment. So, well, that's not our problem. You bid to this level.
Right.
So, in the past, our only recourse was to pull the contract and go up and rebid. If we built something like this, then at least they're going to penalize if you don't get it. We still have problems with our reporting.
Yeah, there's times I've had to send in a report incomplete and then have to amend it.
Right.
Due to, there are issues, samples getting lost, things like that. It does happen, but I think Kelly just wants to try to find a way to hold her feet to the fire.
Historically, we've had problems with labs. I mean,
Absolutely.
Yes.
Is this lab some compared to the rest out there? Are they somebody you get along with, or that?
They've been pretty good to deal with. Yes, I'd you know, you could run the risk of having less people bid on something if you go putting that kind of language in there.
And there's less and less
Well,
labs.
Yes, there are less and less labs.
It's not, you're not gonna get less people. What you're gonna do is you're gonna get a build-up in price. And you're
They'll
gonna pay for
accommodate
it.
it some other time.
Yeah. Sure.
The one testing that we do monthly is mercury, and we actually need that, and it was becoming late and late and late every time we tried to submit to the DEC. So they actually contacted us, and we got it going out to Ohio now.
Is there any way we could, if we're going out for a contract, could we write it so that instead of it being a penalty, you get X number if it's returned in 5 days, X number if it's returned in 8 days, X number if it's returned in 10 days? I mean, could we write a schedule like that?
Try to speak a little bit more about that, because each sample has different time.
Yeah, I understand that, but instead of saying it's a penalty, could we give them a bonus if they came back early?
That Charlie did mention that. Now you're going to get into where if they do come back early, now they're getting a bonus instead of being.
Yeah, I know.
So where does the money for that come from?
You can't, typically you can't just.
Typically,
we're
you
gonna
can't
find
penalize
it.
somebody
Right.
unless you give them
Unless you offer them.
An incentive.
an incentive.
Right.
Now, do we always need this lab service, or are we gonna do it in-house once this is in full operation?
We could assume more analyticals, and then we would have to make sure that we're, NELAC certified.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
we could, yes.
Right, I'm just curious about that. So you're satisfied with this lab's work right now, what they're doing? Because I know one that we got, Kathy wasn't happy with, and we went out for things, but with this lab that's doing it for us now, are you pretty well satisfied with it?
Yes, there are some parameters that come in late, and we know which ones they are. What I do with Kelly is let him know I'm getting everything ready to report, and then he'll make phone calls if we're missing something and expedite it. And that's what we've been doing. And he gets them here in time.
I personally would like to see the carrot and the stick instead of just the penalty.
Could we see a draft? Again, that could be something at a special meeting. We need to get it out to advertise. This runs through the end of July, right?
Either 1st of July or the end of July. I don't have my schedule on. I'll have to check.
That's true.
End of July.
Alrighty.
Next one, Charlie.
I wanted to bring up methanol. Again, soon we're gonna be having to go up for methanol. The last time we actually did this was 2008, and I had a 2012 standard of what we got, the ASTM D1152, 2012 of what 99.85% methanol is considered. I want to make sure that that is what the new plant requires. I haven't seen anything as to what we have to be able to have on the truck to get the methanol here. Can we pump it? Do they have to pump it? The fittings, I guess, are fairly standard, but I guess isn't what I want to bid. I want to know precisely what, when, and how much.
Has the fire department been here to inspect the installation?
Not to my knowledge.
You ain't doing nothing.
No, they did make contact. I think the management was asking them to wait. Do you know anything about that, Ron?
I know they asked them to come,
Yeah.
but there's been some problem of them hesitating to do that.
Yeah, I think Jacob was happy to hear from him, but told him that they had to wait. I don't know why.
I think there's some fittings that may be the problem that weren't approved.
And they don't want the fire department to see them, or?
Well, no, we don't wanna put things through them if
Yeah,
they're
right.
gonna be changed.
Right, I get it, but I think the more important for them is to see where it is and how big it is and,
Right,
you know.
they need to approve it, and if we're gonna change out the
right,
fittings.
yeah, now's the time.
Well, we need to wait.
Pass back up to them, please. Do we need a 90-day notice
Yes.
before they want the first
That's,
truck to arrive in the gate, just so we can get things ready?
that's kind of
Does that affect Kruger?
big time.
I think,
Yeah, for denitrification, you need methanol.
Yeah,
And I
that's
don't-
the way I understood it.
I don't wanna, I'd rather be a little proactive and ahead of the game than waiting too long.
so Craig, why don't we fix that date? At our meeting? Because we,
Sal's meeting, or,
at the owners.
okay.
Because right now we have a plan when startup is gonna be, we're gonna need it for startup.
Yeah,
So let's,
so 90 days ahead of that, we'd like to know.
which is about now.
Yeah.
We need the spec in order to develop the bid documents.
Is there a meeting tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, 9:15, or did you do away with that meeting? I had heard it went to every other week.
It's not tomorrow.
It's not tomorrow?
There's,
I need to start making meetings.
there's one at 8, 8:15. I think the one at 9 is probably next week.
Is there anything that I would be welcome at?
You're welcome, everyone.
Uh-huh.
The owners meeting at
As
11.
much as I am some of the time.
We're some waiters.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're not gonna do anything with that until we find out. It'll be another add-on to the special meeting we're probably gonna have.
That's it for me.
That's it for you, Jason Greene. I want to get you up here and, because I noticed you were supposed to be here at 4.
4:30. I struggled to get in the door. I apologize. I was waiting
No,
in
that's
the
not your fault.
kiosk back there for a little while.
We gotta start thinking about that.
That's Michelle's fault.
Put a brick right there.
Did you ring the bell?
A few times. I didn't want to keep ringing, so then somebody just walked by and I got in that way.
Nobody answers the bell.
We should have door stops to prop it open for when it's a public meeting.
Yeah, but there's
Oh,
other
my.
extensions here that can release the door to let people in.
It's Michelle's fault.
No, I mean, after 3:30, Gina's gone too.
But there's other offices that can open up the door.
All right, okay, we'll discuss this later, Jason.
I only mentioned it because I didn't want you to think I was late, so I apologize for that. That's all.
Okay.
So I'm here to present on the status report for IWPP for April.
Which is in your folders.
Right here.
I also have the March report if there's any questions from last month as well. The biggest, biggest items we're working through, there's nothing, I guess, overly major right now, but we did have a discharge request modification from Norfolk Southern. They just wanted to basically modify their treatment chemicals. So we worked with Craig and Elliott and the user to kind of figure out what that was. That's like the washing station down there for Norfolk Southern. So we had that. We did have like a little program overview meeting with Elliott and Craig earlier in the month, just to kind of talk over some of the details and give like an outline of what the day-to-day is and what the typical work is for pre-treatment, that is. We had an IWPP shutdown, or annual shutdown by Frito-Lay. They do it once or twice a year where they shut down and clean out their tanks. So they did that this month. And then we did get a couple straggler PCRs that come in late that we were processing for second half 2018. So outside of that, it's business as usual as far as getting permit renewals and still working on the clarification of local limits. That's kind of the big items, I think.
Can you repeat that, Jason, the limits? You spoke of the limits?
Just it's been kind of a standing item on my reports, but that clarification of the local limit.
Correct.
Between the 1.0 copper versus 0.5, I believe, and it's copper, zinc, and nickel. Those three parameters concerned.
Yes,
So we had talked about it during our overview meeting, and
there's two sets of parameters, right?
two sets of limits.
Two sets of limits
But,
for those three.
I mean, the one that the board actually approved, is not the one you want. And so somebody's got to give us some kind of scientific basis to say that this other set of limits is correct, and that hasn't been presented to the board. So, I mean, I don't see this going forward until somebody gives us the science and explains it to us and shows us that, you know, from a headworks type analysis, that's the right number.
So,
And that should be based on the new plant, you know, as well.
Is there a federal guideline, state guideline, anything out there?
So when we did the original headworks analysis back in, I want to say 06 or whatever,
Right, 2006.
that was the science-based limits
all right.
set. So we can set it again, but we just have to redo the headworks analysis, or someone would have to redo it. So.
Because what we voted on and approved was what the headworks analysis said.
Yep. And then
The one that we had.
And I did follow up with a letter that's signed by GHD with the limits that we submitted to EPA, and then EPA's letter back saying those are approved.
But that wasn't in the headworks analysis.
Okay.
You know, I mean,
It was in the PowerPoint presentations that were presented to the
but
board.
that's not a headworks analysis.
It was part of the continuation of the headworks analysis.
That the EPA approved,
The river
the lower, yeah.
The higher limits, EPA approved the higher limits, the more relaxed
During
numbers.
George Bush's administration.
Yeah, but the EPA hasn't approved the limits that you have right now.
Right. So, we can't use them, we can't fine, we can't,
I don't know, seems like it might be a little difficult.
I have not approached the EPA to ask them what their opinion is at this point. If that's what the board wants me to do, I can do that.
No, we don't want you to do that. We want you to come back to us with some kind of a, you know, documentation of a headworks analysis that supports making a change from what's in our rules and regulations.
Beyond what was already presented in those PowerPoint presentations, showing the math and showing, because that was scientifically showing the math.
The
and saying,
PowerPoint presentation is not a headworks analysis. There's a difference.
I know, we did a headworks analysis, and then
Right,
we followed
and
that with
we did the headworks-
analysis in the PowerPoint presentation
but-
that was a carry-on from the
but-
from the headworks
The
analysis.
rules and regulations amendment that we approved back in 2007 or 8, I think it was 7, because I was on the board then. We adopted what was in the headworks analysis, didn't we? You know, if you're saying we didn't, then somebody needs to explain this to us and give us the documentation and
I don't know
put it in
how-
a folder or something.
And I don't have any paper trail showing what was actually approved, other than the one document you sent me with the yays and nays, which was like a 5-line passage from the middle of the.
Right, and the
So
attachment, there was an attachment to the minutes of what we were voting on at the time. I'll send it again.
So what was submitted to the EPA was something other than what the headworks analysis? The conclusions of the headworks analysis, is that it?
That's my understanding.
Why, do we know why that was done?
It was done by GHD and, you know, it wasn't something they came to the board first about.
It was presented to the board in a PowerPoint presentation where we said, here are what the limits would be based on the headworks analysis. However, given that they're so low or they're very restrictive and it's quite a jump down from where you were at like 8 or 12 milligrams per liter and 20 milligrams per liter, we said these are pretty significant drops. So let's take a harder look at those 3 parameters because they're most concerning compared to the other like 6 or 7 that were in the list. And we said, if you take away some of the safety factor and you don't build as much reserve for future allocation and you do this and you do this, we can run the numbers and show that you can do the higher limits instead of those lower, more restrictive ones while still managing some level of buffer, and then you can then reassess them again at a later date. That was the premise of that PowerPoint presentation. If you kind of piece together the report and then the follow-ups, and then you can see the letters that were going out to the users saying, here's what potential limits might be, here's what they are officially.
We don't have all that documentation. I don't even think we have the whole PowerPoint presentation. You know, the current board members certainly don't.
Okay. But if I had that documentation, it still doesn't tell you what the plant should be taking today. It's what they, in theory, came to conclusion on taking back in 2006. So, we can just keep going with what we have and.
I think we should
We should address
stick a pin
it.
in this until after we're up and running.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
So what year do you want to pick?
I mean, we still need to address the retroactive question, right? I mean, obviously.
Yeah, look into that.
Have we find anybody?
So we need to, but it's still,
What do you want me to look into?
the enforcement that they're doing is based on different numbers.
We have 10 years of
What was in
enforcement
the
based
rules
on
and
the other numbers,
regulations.
or 12 years.
Have we find anybody for those numbers?
Unofficially, I think we found roughly 24 additional violations if you had had the lower limits compared to the ones we actually have been administering over the course of those 12 years. So,
Okay.
We should clean it up. But we've got to have the documentation to do it, you know, so that everybody understands. 'Cause I
so the
guarantee you-
documentation in your mind would be a more clear version of the stuff we've been sending over, that I've been sending over to Michelle and Kathy
That's not getting to the board.
at all, okay?
Not all of
It's
it.
the letters, the memo, the presentation, and then the response from EPA saying approved.
I don't think we've got all
Do you want me to
that.
recreate the math to show how that math was supported and why it made sense at the time?
We don't have that either.
Do you want me to do that?
Yes,
Is that something the
That
board
would
would like me
help.
to actually
You know,
run
that
the
would help.
numbers and show like updated version?
right, then we can go.
Shouldn't have to recreate it if we've done one.
I just have to maybe piece it together. It's 12 years old. I gotta go actually get the files electronically, see what the data was based on, and pull that together. So that's what I'll do.
Okay.
That'll be 2 meetings out again. So that'll be in July.
Sounds good.
Any other questions?
I mean, if that could be sent in advance of the meeting so we could study it, that would help a lot too.
Understood? And how do you want that sent?
Depends on how big your files are. Maybe you might have to put on a disk or thumb drive and send it.
No, I mean, should I go through Craig and Michelle, or should I send it
That's why when you get it together.
Send one to them and when they're
And there's nothing to stop you if it's emailable, sending it to all the board members. You work for all of us.
Depending on the size, if it's,
Yeah, if you send it to me, I could forward it on.
No, there's just been a line of communication, and typically I get redirected to send everything to Kathy and Michelle, and then that way they can see it and disseminate it back to the board. But
Yeah.
I do work for the board, and whatever you guys want, tell me what you want, and we'll make it happen.
And just send it to Greg, and then he'll just have it dispersed to whoever wants it. Thank you, Jason.
thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you. No problem.
I'll see you.
Superintendent's report.
Superintendent's report for May 14th, 2019. Violations and significant issues we talked about earlier with the fines on BOD TSS non-compliance. BOD percent removal for April was 23%. Settable solids, max was 0.6 mils per liter. Plant effluent. Percent removal on suspended solids, 74%. Lime stabilized sludge was up slightly from March, from 559 tons to 640 tons. Pounds, CBOD per day, plant effluent is within the limits, 17,570 for the month. Suspended solids is within the limits, 9,440.
That's outside the limits. After January 1, 2018,
Well,
it's
yes, after-
5,254 pounds
yes.
a day of CBOD and 5,828.
Correct,
per
I
day.
stand corrected. That is why we're being fined.
Exactly. That's the consent order, right?
I'm going to move on to some bullet points. There's some issues that I wanted to make everybody aware of. There was some work done on our head house wet well back when the wet well was drained and we were in bypass pump mode. One of the
When the pumps froze, or the,
one of the upgrades was to replace our suction and discharge valves on our main pumps. And they were replaced. And the wet well was put back into service. During that time frame, one of our plant employees noticed that they were in backwards and are still in backwards at this time.
All of them?
All of it.
Suction valves.
Just the suction,
Just
not discharge.
how many are you talking?
4.
Four.
And Howard looked into manufacturers' recommendations on installation, and it was not recommended for them to be in that configuration.
Matter of fact, there was a warning on it.
Yes.
I want to point out that this was under direction of the lead agency and not plant management that supervised this installation. That was not made clear. but this was found by employees.
I would have done it. Let me-
Okay, that's it.
Don't put your mouth in, in jeopardy.
No, my-
Now, is this something that was done by contract 5 or by contract 8? These
Contract
ballots?
5.
5.
Contract 5, and there is a schedule now to correct them.
Oh, you are gonna correct them.
Yes.
Last I knew, it wasn't feasible. And that was the word that came out.
I just
of-
left a meeting with PC, and they promised that they would stay.
That's the word that came out of GHD's mouth and,
Feasible?
at a meeting, so I was just curious.
That's good news.
No.
I take back my.
As far as I know right now, they will be correct.
Do you know when?
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, it does matter, because the longer they're in existence, the worse they're gonna become,
If they have to close it.
if they have to close it in an emergency.
My memory's right, within a month they're gonna start correcting them.
And do you know how they're gonna do that?
They're gonna cut off the
Change the
flow,
way.
pump around, and do them one at a time. But it'll take several hours if they have to pump around while they disconnect.
I was gonna say,
And,
So they're gonna have to bypass pump?
yes,
and where's that gonna go to?
I don't know what they have figured out.
Straight out to the river?
Yeah, upstream.
Does the DEC have to be notified?
Right.
Out to Ackley Avenue.
Well, what?
No, they're not, it's not going out.
Okay.
No, it's staying within the system.
But, that is sort of disturbing that you turn around and get it, you get it secondhand. I wasn't there, but it came from reliable sources that it wasn't feasible. What's not feasible by doing it right and correcting it? I don't understand. Especially that leaving it that way, and then if you had to turn around and work the valve, you couldn't do it because it was frozen.
As far as I know, if this happened,
Those don't seem to be construction meetings, they seem to be destructive meetings. When they turn around and refuse it. For some reason, we're working for them. I don't believe that's correct. That's what's happening.
Well,
But thanks for the good news.
my concern is how it's gonna impact the plant.
Yeah,
If they're
no.
going to bypass pumping, we still have to take 20 from Binghamton. So,
and it will be done at the lowest flow, so.
Maybe never.
Yeah, this.
When it stops raining.
okay, yes.
Oh, then it's never gonna get done.
Okay, next bullet point, Ellie and I and Jim Ross have had to give some tours lately, and to prospective bidders of the RFP. And there's a certain area that every time we went through it, we noticed that the original BAF stack channel is still leaking from the ceiling. And there's an expansion joint over there that was leaking from the original BAFs and is still leaking today.
Is that on the influent level or the effluent level or both?
Effluent level. So there's something we begged them to tear down as part of the
Rebuild.
25%
Right.
engineering, 60%.
That's the section that's been retrofitted.
Bring that up tomorrow, I think that's been discussed, but bring it up next year.
Yeah, I think they said that they're injecting. There's so many cracks over there, it's like a rainforest. And then to walk through the expansion joint, it's like a waterfall, basically. It's pretty bad.
How long has this been going on for?
Since 2007.
Nobody noticed
Well,
it?
since they flooded the bath, cement cells,
Well, let's hash it out tomorrow.
when it was dry, it wasn't leaking at all.
Moving on, I have nothing all bit, to discuss, but we already discussed that. We have been asking for as-bills. We did get an as-bill for a stormwater pump station, and it's not correct. We were waiting for it to be revised. It does not match up with our present piping configuration on our stormwater pumps. The stormwater pumps, piped the way they are, do work just fine the way they are, but we would just like that as-built to match what we have presently.
The problem there is if, well, let's say a private ops company comes in to operate the valves for that stormwater pump station, they could be pumping stuff over the wall instead of recycling, or recycling instead of pumping it over. The piping configuration is not correct on the as-built drawing, nor the valve configuration.
Moving on, scrubber building, sulfuric acid line work has been done. They went to a double wall because it was overhead, and the chemical pumps are going to be reconfigured. We're just waiting for Jacobs on how that's going to be done, so we get those two items done and proceed to get the scrubber building started up. There's an issue with our lab. It's getting very complicated. A lot of emails going back and forth. The east side of the lab has been completed. The town of Vestal will not issue a conditional certificate of occupancy
No such thing.
for the east side of the lab, so we can move over there, is my understanding. And now we are being asked to relocate the lab to somewhere else in the facility, which it's going to be extremely difficult to do that, and it's going to require some. Yes, and not only when you move, then you gotta have another lab inspection. So we're gonna have to have a lab audit done to resume testing.
They want us to build a lab so they can build a lab for us.
So we're on a standstill on that, and I'm reaching
Well,
out.
that's what I got Ron like they were discussing it for 2 days. Who confirmed that Vestal would not give you? You did, Ron?
I met with them personally.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Good for them. Good for them. Speaking as a person who has issued certificates of compliance or occupancy, good for them. They shouldn't. My own opinion.
Well, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but we've got to come up with some type of a solution.
We don't have to come up with a solution. They do.
Oh, no, not according to them.
That's hooey, George.
Huh?
That's hooey.
I believe that's who I agree with it, but we aren't the lead agency to force it.
We have to comply.
What did GHD say to you?
Not their problem.
Not their problem. Okay.
So,
Whose problem is it?
well,
It's ours.
Yeah, apparently the plans.
No, it's not.
We're dysfunctional.
No, but it's still, it's not. All of that aside, it's not our problem.
We definitely agree, but it is our problem, and it's gonna, be some hectic work here because we ain't gonna be able to do any testing.
If you say you can't move and you can't test, or you can't send it out to be tested, tell me that's your answer, and I'll go back to the city and find out what's gonna be done about it.
We can't send it out because it has to be sampled on site, I believe, and tested on site.
And you can't compromise,
Greg,
you can't compromise the lab.
Well, here's the deal, you can't get the rest of it, you can't get your new lab built to evacuate where you are now.
Was that part of the plan from the beginning?
Kind of like administrative. Find a
I
new
think
building
everybody
while we-
assumed that they could just move from one side to the other. I don't see any pre-planning on that. Everyone assumed that they were just gonna move over.
Was there mention of a lab trailer at one point?
At the beginning.
I think there was at the beginning of the job, from what I hear. Or during design, I don't know if it's, it got left
Do you
out.
remember?
I do. Yeah, we would propose a lab trailer to complete the lab in one fell swoop.
Okay.
What happened?
The idea was rejected.
But
I don't know, it was our idea, and it's the contractor's means and methods to do it. So my input was moot.
Right,
I
okay.
don't understand, it's, right from the beginning, somebody has to have realized that this lab testing is an ongoing thing and it can't be interrupted.
we tried to make that clear.
Well, I guess that's what we have to do is make it clear now.
Well, it's not up to us to do that, George.
Well, it is for the people that work underneath us, and our direction is to give the answer. And if Ron is saying what I think he said, that he's gotta take it back to the city of Binghamton, that's what's gotta be done.
Yeah, because there's no pay item in their contract for temporary lab.
Well, we don't have the money.
The problem is you want that up and operating, and I don't know how
It has,
I don't know how long it's
it
gonna
has to
take
be
to
up.
find a temporary lab that you could move in here, or what the cost is gonna be.
Where are they proposing they move to?
Don't know.
Is there a plan?
Think they're looking.
We, as a team, have come up with some preliminary ideas, and they all need work. The only clean spot would be the op shop. It's insufficient power, no ventilation, and it has to displace operations.
When
Again,
you
can't put your employees in that,
I don't want
So we'd have to come inspect it before they'd approve it.
Did you ever find out any information what that
killing me.
trailer lab would cost us? Did you ever get any prices on it?
Yeah, we had pricing on it a while ago, yeah.
Okay.
There was different models you could, there was different models I remember seeing.
Well, at least we can give them maybe the information so they can look at it, because I feel that's the only alternative here right now. So let me understand, you're saying that the certified testing can't go out? Yeah, that's
The
what I'm saying.
certified testing that currently goes out will continue to go out, but
Right.
there's certified testing done here on site that is daily reportable, so we can't afford to send it out.
Multiple.
We're certified to do
Yes.
that daily.
Three times a day.
Multiple times a day.
All we need is a certified trailer. Right now.
I'm sure that the owner's contract says that they can't interrupt the ongoing operation, so that ought to have been clear to the contractor that it was gonna have to provide a facility so that the ongoing operation could continue. I don't understand why this is even an issue.
I think the only reason it's an issue is that
Contract terminated.
nobody went to Vestal to see if they could get a partial occupancy.
But again, that would have been the contractor's responsibility, because it was supposed to,
Well, not if you were led by the designer that you could do that.
Right. The designer should have called it out as either supply a temporary lab facility
Right. Okay.
or,
This is not something you stick on the contractor. There should have been provisions in the original contract, as Ray says,
correct.
So what,
to provide for whatever they were gonna do.
when do they want to get in to finish the lab, and how long is it gonna take? You know?
They wanna get in there now, and it's probably gonna take, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 weeks, because there's asbestos on the other side, we gotta get rid of that.
Okay. Do you know where we set that trailer up? Because I believe that's gonna be somebody's zoning alternative.